Okay, so as far as pencils go, art pencils have a rating in terms of how hard or soft something is. The harder the pencil is, the lighter it will write, and it'll feel almost glassy kind of when it's going over your paper. Whereas the softer something is, a pencil is, the darker it will be. Usually the more crumbly it'll be a little harder to erase and sharpen because it'll just be more likely to break. So in the middle, we have HB, which is like a regular yellow number 2 pencil. It's right in the middle. It's not hard, not soft. And as we go this way, we move into the H's on the left. So 2H is pretty light. Personally, I don't find a lot of use for the H's beyond like 2H. They get so light that if you're working on a drawing that's, to me, my personal opinion, if you're working on a drawing that's like bigger than this, the amount that they'll apply without you just like having to dig in with them, because you also have to press a little bit harder to get anything darker with 2H or H's, is almost not useful at all. Whereas if you have a full range of B's, that's why the HB is right in the middle. H is soft, H is hard, sorry. B is soft. I don't know why B is the soft one. Like 2B, which is what this charcoal is, medium 2B. You can usually get a lot more range out of this. So this one pencil is kind of where I like to sit, because if you need one, this has a pretty good range of going dark, and with a little bit of pressure, you can go pretty light. Whereas the H's are almost, this is as dark as it can go, and with a little bit of pressure, it goes lighter. So to me, they're not as useful, but sometimes they're useful for tiny detail parts. You can go all the way to 9B and 9H. 9H is like, it feels like a piece of metal almost. Like when you draw with it, it doesn't even look like the tip is wearing down. It's so hard. And then 9B is like those ebony pencils, that the layout pencils, you probably have kind of like the onyx silvery outside. Super silky, really, when you draw with it. The other problem with the B's is they basically deposit a lot when you draw, so you'll have to sharpen them more often, but they're also prone to breaking, so that's also a problem, which is why I like this 2B, because it's just in the range that I can get a good dark and a good light with it, and everything in between. But it also, if you drop it, or if I put mine in this pencil case and they're always rattling around my backpack, it doesn't break as often. I've never had it break in here while it's been shuffled around my backpack. Whereas like a 9B pencil, absolutely, it's gonna break. You need to bubble wrap that thing. The range works for both charcoal and graphite and any other material for drawing. This is the general grading. For charcoal though, usually they don't go into odd numbers. So there will be from 1 to 9 in graphite. It's pretty easy to find those. For charcoal, they'll usually skip, because I guess there's not so much of a difference between a 2B and a 4B. And then I think there's a 6B. If you buy the General's charcoal pack, it'll be like extra soft, soft, medium, and then there will be like an HB, which is hard in charcoal, and they don't really have H's. Just keep that in mind. You probably won't deal with this with charcoal. It's almost all HB to B's. With charcoal, HB and 6B to me, it's almost no difference. People will probably argue with me, but this is, it's almost like if you, once you go absolute darkness, absolute black like that, how do you go any darker than that? And 4B gets you there pretty quickly, but you can get there pretty easily with, you know, that's not even using that much pressure, and it's pretty dark. So this is what I draw almost everything with for my darks and details. This is really good at getting details. And then we have Vine charcoal. You might have seen Vine charcoal. Has these little sticks, burnt sticks, and I stuck my hand in the bag and it's already all charcoaly. Usually they're twigs that you burn down. That's, you know, how charcoal's made as you cook sticks. These, I hate these. These are terrible. That'll be what you find most commonly everywhere. The specific brand that I like is Nitram. I'm not sponsored by Nitram, but I just found these at one point, and they're like the best Vine charcoal I've ever used. And I highly recommend them to everyone I talk about drawing to. So with Vine charcoal, you can get really flowy, we could say, marks, you know, nice and expressive. Whereas you can't really do, this is more for details. It's a little bit harder to be a little more expressive. You can still do it a little bit, but it's easy to loosen up a lot with the Vine charcoal or willow charcoal. They're basically the same thing. But the problem is this Vine charcoal does not want to stay on the paper, you know, in that area. Anything that you drew into that, if you're trying to get into details or anything like that, if you close your sketchbook, it's already kind of faded away from its darkest. It can be really annoying, and it almost feels like building with wet sand, where you're trying to hold on to things and it's still collapsing in on itself. This Vine charcoal stays in place better. Other thing about Nitram. And it's not really expensive. You'll get a 5-pack for.
So the lighter the pencil, the darker it is?
The harder the pencil, H into H, the lighter it'll come out, and the softer the pencil, the darker it'll come out. Vine or willow. It comes from a vine, burning a vine.
Like a V?
Yes, V. Yeah. Yeah. And then the echo doesn't help either. Yeah, vine charcoal, like a plant that grows on a fence. The nice thing though is you can see it erases, it's pretty forgiving. It erases quite a ways back, whereas the compressed pencil it's not as forgiving. Once you go this dark or once you go into the darker, you know, I still have this ugly mark if I wanted to totally move that around. Whereas the Nitram will stay in place a little bit better, but it's still forgiving. So usually what I'll do with drawings is block in and do a lot of the drawing with the Nitram pencil or Vine charcoal, and it can go pretty dark. That's not super dark, but then if I need to go any darker, I'll use the compressed on top of that. Whereas sometimes, and I'm going to give you all this to play around, I'm just telling you up front, because there will be problems you run into. The Vine charcoal, it's almost just sitting on top of the paper. It's not in the paper. And so sometimes when you try to draw over it, you see in some of these areas, focus. I've actually scraped it back on accident. When I'm trying to go darker, I've scraped it back because the other Vine charcoal doesn't really want to sit in the paper. It sits on top of the paper, which can be really frustrating if you spent a lot of time laboriously building up an area, darkening it, and then you're like, okay, now I'm going to go one step darker, and you actually end up going one step darker in some areas and removing some charcoal in other areas. That's really annoying. So with these, you can sharpen them the exact same way. Oh, the other thing is these are not as brittle. These usually come, the vine charcoal and the willow charcoal usually come in long sticks. They are little stubs because they are so brittle. These will still break if you put too much pressure on them. You shouldn't be drawing with them like a pencil. You can if you need to get into details, but it's really easy to just put enough pressure with the back of it. You'll sharpen them the exact same way. I'll do a sharpening demo. As this, except I wouldn't don't go into it with a knife. You'll end up kind of just chipping away. It's not going to peel. The knife is really just for peeling away the wood. So it's in a square. What you do is hit every corner with, not a ton of pressure, and gripping up close. If you grip down here, you're going to put a lot of strain in here and you're going to break it. I hit one corner, rotating to the other corner, rotating to the other corner, rotating to the other corner. It's like that. And then I just continue rotating. You can get these pretty sharp and it'll stay sharp relative to the other vine charcoal. This is where I was saying, if you get a small jar, you can capture all this and just get a paintbrush and paint with it. So yeah, pretty nice and sharp. We can get some pretty good details with this. With these two, there will be times, even though, this is the charcoal I draw with and I really like this charcoal. There's kind of some hard spots within these, like there are the generals. If you hit one, it'll make kind of a scratching noise and you'll feel, if you're kind of paying attention, you'll feel it in your hand. You'll go from, let me move this up. You'll go from, depositing it relatively consistently to like a scratching noise. I don't think I have one. It's not super common to hit those, but sometimes it'll go from this to not really putting anything down, even though you're using pressure. It's just a hard spot. Just go and sharpen that out. It just happens. Don't try to fight through that because it'll scrape up the paper and be really annoying. And you'll frustrate yourself trying to figure out what's going on. It's just a hard spot. Sometimes the materials are a little bit flawed. Okay, so let me hand out. I'll roll it out. you can see just barely, there's a little bit of like a furry seam around it. That's glue. It's gonna break right on that already. If you see that a little bit, just break that and sharpen it off. There's no reason to fight that. It's gonna break eventually, and that glue will not want to deposit as well. It'll just kind of block things out. So it's also a material flaw that you could run into. There's also compressed charcoal. This looks like a little block of compressed charcoal. It'll come into sticks. It usually feels a little heavier, a little denser. I hate drawing with that. It's annoying to carry around. Like you can't sharpen it, and it's super dirty. So it's super common to find. Am I muted? No. Yeah. It's super common to find. Usually it'll be in bigger rectangular blocks. I don't ever use it. I find it really annoying. You can get as loose with the nitrum vine charcoal as that's kind of what the point of the block is, to get kind of looser with it. But it stays better and you don't have to worry about charcoal as much, all around your workspace. So. Yeah.
We're supposed to copy these to our sketch.
Yes, I'll touch on that.
Okay.
The value scale, we'll be doing both of them on our sketchbook. I initially printed it out to be filled in, but this paper is kind of glossy and it's not the best to draw on top of with charcoal. You want to take the time, whatever direction fits best in your sketchbook, to set up 9 squares like this, as equal size as possible. It doesn't really matter, but just so that you can fit them a little easier. Oh yeah, if you're missing a handout, the other handouts are over there. Or the extras are right there. Okay, so with this value scale, it says up here, value is the measurement of how light or dark an object is. The value of an object is affected by how close an object is to a light source, but also by the local color of an object. Local color being whatever color something is. So my black shirt in direct light is still going to be in this range. Even with direct light on it, the lightest spot is still never going to be up into here. Just let that be planted in your head as a seed. We'll talk about that more as we go on to still lives. Value is perhaps the most important aspect of creating convincing realistic drawings and paintings. When I teach painting, everyone loves color. Color is the prettiest part of painting. But the problem is that if your values aren't correct underneath, the color doesn't really matter. Color is like 10% important in a painting. The drawing underneath, in terms of the way you structure things, and the value is the 90% before that. And then color is just the frosting on top. You can have the ugliest colors, but if they're placed correctly in value, the painting will be convincing realistically of whatever you're trying to render. Maintaining a proper value hierarchy in which all objects in the drawing are rendered consistently with how far or close they are to a light source. I'll talk about this more tomorrow, Monday. As we have a light source, as things move away from the light source, not physically, but as they're placed further away from a light source, that direct light is going to get weaker. So an object right here, if the light source is right here, the lightest part on that object is going to be lighter than the lightest part on an object that's further away. So with this value scale, we just want to practice getting all the nuances in between. We have white as value scale 1, and 9 will be the darkest. The easiest way I find to do this is go into the 9, push it dark. What you don't need to do is put tons and tons of pressure of grinding down this, either pencil really. You don't really want to scar paper, just drawing with enough pressure to start to darken it more and more is better. One, you won't have these nasty trenches in your drawing. And then two, if you get in the habit of drawing lightly, you can get dark enough, close enough to black, while it's still being pretty forgiving when you're actually drawing things. So we'll go 9. And what I find is easiest is going 9. Some people use a 10 value scale, some people use less. I like the 9 value scale because you can do 1, 9, 5 is half and half in between these two perfectly. And then 3 is in between 1 and 5. And then you can do the in-betweens more easily to judge where things should lie. 3 should be somewhere halfway in between 1 and 5. 2 should be halfway in between 3 and 1. 7 should be halfway in between 9 and 5 as you go on. I like using this old paintbrush. People often use the blending stumps. I don't really like the blending stumps too much because they can kind of burnish the paper. You'll smooth the paper if you press too hard and it becomes kind of glossy. So the paintbrush and these terrible paper towels, that's what these are so good for, is because they don't absorb anything when you have to clean up a mess. They're really good for blending things around. You know, they're back there. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. You can blend things around really easily with these, and it's kind of like pushing it into the paper, softly massaging against the paper. Oh, you don't want to really use your fingers to blend things around. I know that's like, it's like a primal urge to want to blend things with your fingers. Your fingers, regardless of how clean they are, have oils on them and they'll deposit into the paper. And so you'll, be blending a dark area and you'll have oil in your hand, on your thumbprint, and the oil will be deposited into the paper, and the charcoal will hold in that spot that there's oil in, and it'll be darker in that area. So you'll be, maybe moving something around, or maybe trying to get something darker, or maybe you made something too dark and you're trying to lighten it, and you can't remove, once you have that oil in the paper, you can't remove the oil out. So using the paper towel is a good way to still be able to blend with your fingers, but also circumvent the kind of problems that you'll have with the oils in your hand. So what I often do is I'll have one layer, I'll blend it in with the paper towel, and then I'll do one layer on top of it. Blend that in. And then do another layer and another layer and another layer. It shouldn't take that long. Eventually you will reach a point, and it'll be like 4 layers in probably, where you won't be able to deposit any more charcoal. The paper will basically be saturated with the vine charcoal. And at that point, you can kind of move on to this compressed charcoal, and you'll only need a little bit in there, and then blending that in. This will help you get really smooth, nice shadows and dark areas. As we move into rendering tomorrow, you could draw, I'm gonna do it off to the side. You can shade in an area, like this. But that makes a really noisy value. And what I mean by that is there's a lot going on. When you look at shadows in real life, they're very quiet, they're very still. It's the lack of light, it's the lack of form. So a noisy shadow kind of screaming out of the shadows like this could be an interesting concept for something, but for this class right now, we want nice and quiet, smooth, consistent shadows like that. So practice kind of smudging in and blending. The other thing with the kneaded eraser is they're really good at, they're not great at taking all of the charcoal off the paper, but they're really good at just taking one or two values, knocking something one or two values down. So if you have the 9 and then you make the 8, you have the 9 as dark as you can get it, and then you make the 8 and you accidentally go the same exact darkness as this 9, you can take your kneaded eraser and dab, and it'll lift up a little bit of charcoal if you're dabbing at it. And then you can kind of blend it back into place and get it consistent again. So practice applying charcoal in these, the blocks. They don't have to be, I would make them as neat as possible, but it's not going to be super important that they are equal size and all that other stuff. I just want to make sure that you can get this, you can recognize the separation in how turning up the value, one value scale darker, and then we'll do the totally blended gradient one, like up on the board. what's probably gonna happen is, I started with my 9, I pushed it pretty dark, and then I went to my 5. And then I went to my 7, and I feel like my 7 is in between my 5 and my 9. But as I move up to do my 8, I feel like I'll get really close to the 9 and there won't be enough of a step difference. So what I'm gonna do is go back into the 9 and darken the 9, so there's a little bit more room in between. The 8 will probably take the place of what the 9 looks like now. It looks pretty dark up here, but it's a little bit lighter on my paper. If you have to do that, it's totally fine. You don't need to get these exact each time. This printed out value scale, it's just kind of a flaw of the copier that, you know, some of these look like they're really, really close together, and then these look like they're pretty far apart. You'll be able to shuffle them around. This is just kind of a general guide of how they should look. You only have to do this once. I see some people who did, doubles on this. This was just for like comparison, if you need to know where like a 5 around should be. I think some people you'll notice that, so paper has texture. Some paper is very smooth and some paper has a little bit of texture to it, and the texture is called tooth. You'll notice it a little bit, how it has kind of that staticky look to it. It's kind of speckly when you do a line on top of it. Paper is all fiber, woven, pressed together. And so sometimes it's hard to get into that texture. What you can do, and that could be a problem if you're trying to darken something, but it's really just those speckles that you can't get into. What will really help is if you do a series of lines as close together as possible, is how I generally shade something. In one direction. Up and down seems to be the most natural to begin with. Blend that in. You're working that into the texture when you kind of blend it in. And then do a series of lines in a different direction. You can do horizontally or diagonally. That'll help hit those spots that you can't hit with the initial lines, and that'll help make something darker. And more consistent too. It'll be a nice, flat, consistent shadow or value.
So this is in between the 9 and the 7, or 9 and the 6.
I would do a 5 and then see, because you're not going to be able to know until you start doing the rest of them, and then you'll pick out spots. Okay, I think it could probably go a little darker if that's your darkest, but I would just go into the 5, which should be somewhere between absolute black and total clean paper. And then you'll be able to see, okay, that's where that's going to fall.
Then work my way up.
Then I would do the 7. So
the
in
7.
between here, yeah, like this one, because I did the 5, the 9, and then the 5, and then I did the 7, and I said, okay, I need to make this a little darker so that I can put 1 in between, and then I can judge this. And once I have this locked in, it's like, okay, that's good. Now I need to build up to that 5 darkness.
I see. So start at the 5, kind of go back to the 8, or go back to the 7.
Mhm. And then see if your 8 needs to be darker, because you might be right. That might be the 7 value, and you just need to darken that 8 a little bit more.
Okay.
But I wouldn't do that until you have some of the other values in. So if you've gotten to the point where you've finished your blocks, if you haven't, that's fine. I'll just give you this information ahead of time. Going on to the gradient, I find I basically do it the exact same way as the blocks. I'll go my absolute darkest here. And then build up some middle value. Know that there are basically infinite values in between all of these. They might get so nuanced that it's harder to pick up, but what we're really doing is looking to bring those out in the gradient as much as possible, so there's a really smooth transition. What can generally help is the vine charcoal usually goes to like a 6 or 7. That's pretty much as dark as it can go. So if I know that pretty much this whole area over here is going to be 6 and 7, I can take this charcoal and bring it all the way up to here. And I know that I'll just be darkening that over here as I blend it in. So it's kind of like setting up a base. That's pretty dark. And now I'll just start taking the dark and slowly pushing it in. Lightening my pressure just a little bit and pulling back to continue to darken this area and pulling it in. And then I'll blend it down because I want this dark to go into the lighter values of darkening slightly. And then continue doing that. as you work in the paper towel, you'll notice if you're using one area consistently, it becomes nice and saturated, nice and primed, and it's good at kind of not removing charcoal. Because if you have a nice clean piece, you're trying to blend this area, it's going to pull up a lot of that charcoal and almost erase a little bit. It's kind of halfway in between a kneaded eraser and not doing anything. It erases just a little bit. But that's also good if you go, I'm going a little too dark in this area and I want to lighten it up just barely. I think I'll need the kneaded eraser a little bit in this area, but just lifting up with the paper towel a little bit will help me get the in-between area, and I can lift up with the kneaded eraser in this area to get pretty close. You'll also notice on my image, I go dark and it's going lighter. And then right in this area, it looks like it goes lighter and then it starts to go slightly darker. It's like half a value or a value darker. So double checking my work, I need to make this area darker and or make this area lighter right here in order for it to be a nice, smooth, consistent blend. do the rest of it. Because it's gonna be, just comparing the two. Right now, compared to this one, it is lighter, so it is bright, but once you put it a couple more, it'll let you know. Yeah, you can. I would use, I find this one a little bit easier. Sometimes I would right away. And this one goes with both. Pressing the layer of the yeah, that was the. And cool, probably not.
We'll start with, six.
Now, I would go a little darker than that, hold up, but it looks like the rest of these are. I like to first, I'll bring it back. You are a little happy with it, especially the press of this light. It's super forgiving. All these straight lines. And then I just do. Give me 1 second. Yeah, that's exactly what I would do. And just compare. Just finding a three somewhere.
I'm trying to see how it mirrors.
I would, what I would say is just go into landing on number. If this is your might be I would go, probably it's going to be a little darker than that, probably. And then just kind of, it's like guessing first. We're going to get this somewhere in the range, and then once you get these two in, you'll realize, oh, I actually need to go darker, or I need to go lighter. Yeah, don't worry about it. Just put something in, I think it will go a little darker. So, actually, I'm gonna sharpen my pencil first. then we can talk about this. Okay, so the soft and sharp edges. If you haven't finished those two parts, it's fine. I'm gonna work on this just so we have this done today. We can come back in tomorrow, Monday, and do the modeling part. So what I'm gonna do, how can I position this? I came up with this kind of demo because as we get into the drawing of actual objects, the soft and sharp edges work really well for distinguishing two things that are kind of overlapping. If there's two shapes in the still life that are overlapping, if they both have soft edges, they'll just look like they're kind of blending together, smushed together. And sometimes that's good. As things go further away in perspective, they tend to get a little blurrier. And if you want to push something back in a still life or landscape or anything, you can blur it out and have a little bit more of a soft edge on it. You can still see that this is a square or a circle or a rectangle, but it loses that edge. And when you have multiple shapes losing their edge, they became harder to identify. Whereas the sharp shape, sometimes with detail, students will have too many soft edges and we want to resolve something, we want to sharpen it. I always use that word, sharpen it. And some of my students are like, I don't understand what that means. This is what I mean by sharpen it. Get that nice sharp edge on it. There's a little bit of an outline, but it doesn't really mean to outline something because you want to kind of stay in the same value as the rest of the square, but getting a nice, sharp, kind of confident edge. This is where the shape is for sure ending. With this square, it's like, it's kind of ending over here. It's kind of ending over here. I wouldn't be able to really draw a visual boundary around it because it's disappearing into smoke basically. On the sharp edge, it's really ending right on this boundary. I would do it 1-to-1 just so it's easier. It's not going to be super important to get these exact because, like I said, how do you measure that soft edge? You can't really measure that soft edge. So blocking in the square first. And then just getting a middle value. These go into like the 6-7 range. You don't have to go all the way dark with these, but it's easier to show the soft edge kind of in the middle range to dark range than it is in the lighter range. So it's this, indication of separating in half. And then you can, the way I would get here to the sharp edge is not just by drawing, but rather, not just by drawing with your pencil or your charcoal, but by drawing with your eraser. So I'm inevitably going to spill over this boundary that I just made. And you might have basically been doing this already when you're cleaning up your value scale. Blending it to be consistent. And then taking my eraser and making that pinched shape and cleaning up that edge so it's nice and sharp. And the other thing I can do is kind of corral that shape in using my pencil. It's nice and sharp with pressure that's consistent to give it the same value. I'm going to create a boundary on it. So I'm not outlining. An outline is this. I have a noticeably darker border on it. I don't want a noticeably darker border. I want a border that's the exact same value. So just using lighter pressure to make sure I'm kind of getting in that range. Just because the compressed pencil charcoal is going to hold its spot, its place a little bit better than the vine charcoal. It's better for details. And when you have a really sharp pencil, it's not going to move around as much. And I can kind of blend this in too if it's too dark. And go back with my eraser. That edge again. Some nice sharp edges on one side. And then the blurry edge, the soft edge, isn't super hard. Don't go wild with it. It should vaguely resemble whatever shape you're drawing. But you can basically take this over and then blend with that shape. So I kind of just want to move on that side, move on that side, like that. I actually think that this is kind of coming out too much. I'm going to dab at it just to remove that. This more and more. Then I'm gonna break that edge again, like that. So you can start working on that too. Practicing getting just the right amount of pressure with your charcoal to match a value is going to be really important for this. So those are the two projects that I want you to work on. Yeah, we're right there. So over the weekend, finish up your value scale. You definitely need that done. And the edges too. The edges don't really take that much time. It's just kind of driving that concept home, because we'll be using that on Monday when we start actually modeling those simple shapes. So also you need the simple shapes done, measured out and everything. You don't need to go further than having them measured out one-to-one. Your value scale, and then the edges, just for concept, because if you don't understand these things, it's going to be really hard to go into the modeling part. Yeah, we're right up. We have 2 minutes left. If you guys want to start cleaning up, you can head out. If you have any questions, let me know. I also have all these empty boxes. If you don't have a pencil box, you can use one of these. I'm just gonna throw them away anyway. So you don't have to carry around all your pencils in your backpack.